I was thinking that we'll need to start the video for the YouTube right after I say these few words, because we cannot put that music on YouTube. We don't have the rights to it. So only those present will be able to enjoy it. All right, well, we're going to begin now. We're studying 2 Peter, and I'm glad so many of you are here today, especially in these unusual times that we are facing. Because as you know, when Peter wrote this letter from our lesson last week, when he wrote the first letter, he introduced the idea that they were experiencing a lot of suffering and persecution from the Roman Empire. This was that time that it's important for us to remember what was going on at the time that Peter wrote this book, or the letter really doesn't have the meaning that it should have. I know that we can often go to these scriptures and kind of make them say whatever we want them to say. But if we want to understand what Peter was really trying to get across, it's important to remember the historical context. And that context really is, at this time, Nero, which was that young emperor who was a narcissistic, maybe even psychopathic personality, fought against his government and against the people because he was wanting to make everything for himself. And as you probably remember from last week, those of you who are with me, it was during that time that he was trying to build some new buildings, new palace for himself, new office buildings. He was trying to get rid of some of the old guard, and he was going to deplete the funds of the empire to do all of his self-centered building. And the Congress was against him. And so to show them, he decided he would just burn the place down. And so he was able to start this fire that we know as the Great Fire of Rome. And of course, you heard that he, poetically it's been said, whether it's true or not, that he sat on the wall and played a fiddle and watched the city burn. In that process, many people's lives were destroyed who couldn't get out of the city fast enough. And what happened is that Nero decided rather than to take the blame, he would blame it on someone else, and he blamed it on the Christians. He was trying to eliminate Christians anyway because they didn't make him their Lord. And so this began an unusual persecution that used to focus only on the Jews, now focused on the Christians. And so it began a worldwide persecution of Christians. And as you know, they experienced many horrible things that we won't go through. But in the process, Peter began to write the Christians in his first letter and talk to them about how to endure this time and how to be prepared. His second letter was because the persecution was increasing and the people were finding it very difficult when some of them were leaving the faith. Some of them didn't know what to think about. Where was God? Why would God let such things happen to them when they were trying to do their best they can? Kind of a feelings that we have these days, isn't it? Why would God allow such a thing? If God is real and God is loving and God is powerful, it doesn't make any sense. Well, some of the people in his day were saying the same thing. This just doesn't make any sense. And so Peter wrote this second letter that was not to any particular church. It's called one of the general epistles. It was written to be passed around to all the churches. Remember, they didn't have a Bible. And even the Old Testament, they did not have individual scrolls. The people had to memorize these scriptures and they had to share them with one another and with the children. So what they were looking for is they were looking for some letters from people who had actually been with Jesus and people who knew the truth that Jesus gave them. And so Peter was now telling them what Jesus said, and not only what he said, but what Peter understood that he meant as Peter was led by the Spirit. So I think one of the most powerful verses in this letter was right there at the beginning, where Peter more or less tells why he's writing the letter. And here's what he said. God, in chapter 1, verse 3, he says, God has given us everything we need. He says, we are looking forward to a new heavens and new earth he has promised us, a world fulfilled with God's righteousness. Paul tells us that, and he's telling those people, look, I know you're looking to all kinds of things to fulfill what you need to satisfy your heart, to satisfy your mind, to try and figure out what's happened. Let me give you just a little advice on how you need to look at what you're seeing. As you have your friends and even yourself, when you begin to contemplate what's going on and why it's happening, maybe not just this pandemic, maybe other things in your life. Why have bad things happen to the good people? Why do sometimes people who are evil seem like everything's going great for them? And you begin to wonder. And then you hear people say, well, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe that the Bible is true because this doesn't make any sense to me. You know, I think it's important to understand that we need to have a proper worldview. I don't know how many of you have really thought much about what this idea of a worldview is, but that's what Jesus offered. That's what Peter was trying to remind these people of, is that all of us have a worldview. My mentor as a young man who taught me the great truths of the Bible, Dr. John Paul Newport, one of the finest Christian authors of all times, I believe. He and C.S. Lewis emphasize this one thing, and that is your worldview will determine how you live and how you respond to everything in life. You see, a worldview is how you view the world, how you interpret the world, how you interpret everything that happens around you and everything that happens to you. Do you know what your worldview is? Think about it for a minute. You say, well, what is a worldview? Let me explain it this way. Most of you have heard that in Egypt, they had an alphabet that was called hieroglyphics. Do you remember that? And hieroglyphics were a series of pictures. And that was their alphabet. And instead of using letters, they used pictures to describe ideas. And so hieroglyphics was a series of pictures used to create a language. Unfortunately, for thousands of years, the hieroglyphics was exposed on papyrus and also on stones, but people could not read it. We lost that generation of people. And so for years, we would find these writings of hieroglyphics, but we had no idea what it meant. Well, along about 1700, some people found a wonderful thing called the Rosetta Stone. Some of you remember the Rosetta Stone was this fabulous finding where there were 3 languages written on this large stone. And those 3 languages included hieroglyphics. So it was the key that unlocked the ancient world. From then on, we could understand what was happening in Egypt and through the pharaohs and all the things that we read about in the Bible and read in other cultures. How was that? Because the Rosetta Stone was like a worldview. The Rosetta Stone helped us interpret things we didn't understand. You could look at the Rosetta Stone, see what those different pictures meant by looking at the other languages and other translations. And that was the key to unlock the true meaning of hieroglyphics. Now, think about this. Your worldview is kind of like the Rosetta Stone. Your worldview helps you understand, helps you interpret what you're seeing. When you see terrible things happen, when you see unexplainable things happen, you need something to help you interpret it, something to help you give a clear view so you don't have to just guess at it. And so a worldview is very critical because everybody is going to look at things and interpret them different, but they oftentimes don't realize where their worldview is coming from. You and I, as Christians, Peter is saying, you and I need to know what our worldview is, and we need to know where it comes from. Now, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Ask you to think about, what is my worldview? Let me tell you the 3 basic ways people look at things, the 3 basic worldviews that have always existed and still exist today. First of all, I'm going to put up a little piece of paper here that does that come out right side up? Okay. If you look at this, the first worldview is what I would call heading nowhere. Some people have a view that when you look out and see what's going on, It's really not going anywhere. Nothing's driving it. Nobody's behind it. It just happens. This kind of view of the world, this kind of view of circumstances is sort of a meaningless worldview. It's people who say, grab as much pleasure as you can, avoid as much pain as you can. If you're a person who's trying to help, this would be a view that would be basically, I've got to try and help one another and I've got to help other people. I'm just going to do the best I can because it's all going to end. When you die, it's all over. There's nothing beyond that. You're going nowhere. You're just a hunk of meat. You're dead. It's gone. That's one worldview. And by the way, it's a very popular worldview in our day. It's the worldview of a lot of good people. What was once called the humanistic approach. It says our job on earth is to help other humans, to do the best we can to help other humans. The humanistic view says there is no God. We're not going anywhere. Everybody's going to die. But while we're here, we ought to try to get along the best we can. Have you ever heard people with that kind of view? You know what that kind of view leads to? There is no good or bad. You decide what's good. You decide what's bad. You do what you think. That's the humanistic approach. That's one worldview. If you take that worldview, you basically try and do the best you can now, take care of yourself, take care of others, and know whenever you die, that's it. It's over. The second worldview that has been popular throughout history, in fact, most people in the world, not in America, but most people around the world take this view. I call it the repeating itself view. This is the idea, once called the cyclical view. This is the idea that I look out and I see these things, everything that's happened is just a test. It's testing you, seeing how you do. It's kind of the view we often call the view of karma. What you do is going to determine what you get. And you know, you can look at things and your mind might even accept. That's why this view is the view of most of the people of the world, because the Hindus, Muslims to a great degree, Shintos, many other religions have this view. It is, if you do good to other people, you're going to get paid off good. And you say, yeah, but where is it going? As I say right here, life repeats itself. Means if you do good, then when you die, your physical body dies, it's not going to disappear. Your body's going to come back. You may come back as another creature. You may come back as a part of the royal family because you've been real good, or you may come back as a goat if you've been bad. Some may already look like a goat, but they may not be one. But the idea of this repeating itself is that, and here's it's a very popular idea in America now because of the Eastern mysticism that's coming into America, and this talk of spirituality, is the idea of energy. Is the idea that nothing ever disappears, it just changes. Right now, we may be human beings, but that energy, if you die and you haven't lived a good life, that energy may bring you back as a gnat. It may bring you back in some other way. If you have this worldview that you have no idea, so you just assume everything's going to be all right because you're just going to come back. And if you do real good, you're going to be in good shape. You don't know what it's going to be like, but you're going to be in good shape. This is a very self-centered approach to life. It's a very rational view to life. It's a godless view, but many people in the world have this view. How do you look at what's going on around you? Do you look at it as it's just something that we have to put up with to try and behave ourselves so that we'll get paid off in the end? A lot of people use a Christianized version of this, is that it's just a repetition. The third way of looking at the world, Peter actually brings this out, is that the best worldview is a worldview that I like to call heading home. And that is the journey that we are taking in our physical life is not something that's just going to go nowhere. It's not some kind of a journey that just keeps repeating itself over and over again. It's a journey that actually had a beginning point when you were born. It has an ending point in eternity, which is never. It has a place where you're heading. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. So what I call the heaven-bound worldview has an emphasis on I know where I'm going, but I have duties to do while I'm here now. I have a purpose. I have a God who's given me a job to do. Some people would say, well, if you have this emphasis on heaven, then you won't ever do anything. In other words, you just always heavenly. In fact, some people will criticize us Christians by saying, well, they're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. It's true. You can be so focused on heaven that you don't see the pain around you. But we don't use our own ideas to figure out how to live. We look at our model, which is Jesus. Jesus was always homebound. He was always headed towards heaven. But Jesus, all along the way, did everything that he could physically to help those around him. In fact, I like what C.S. Lewis said. He put it this way: if you read history, you will find that the Christians who did most for the present world were precisely those who thought most of the next. People who have their eyes set on eternity and their mind focused on heaven are people who are working hard here and now for others and not just themselves. Why do we think on heaven? Why do we put our emphasis on the eternal? Why do we think about everlasting life? And we talk so much about it in the New Testament. One reason is because it helps us to remember that we are more than our bodies. If you ever lose this worldview of you're heading home, you'll lose the reality that you're more than your body. It's very difficult when you're hurting, when you're in pain, when you see someone you love that is suffering. It's very difficult to be focusing on heaven. It's very easy to be focusing on the problem. But when you do that, it's almost gets you convinced that there's nothing in life but the body. But as I have tried to remind you, the Bible's emphasis and Jesus' emphasis was on this: you are more than your body. When your body is gone, you still have your mind. It's like I like to say, if they cut off my arm, am I dead? No, I don't. I have a body, I have an arm, but if they cut it off, I'm still me. If they cut off my leg, if they get rid of everything I got, including my brain, I'm still me. I'm still my soul. I'm still my mind. I'm still me. You are still you, because if you have a heavenly perspective, you realize, yes, I have a body. I need to take care of it. Other people have it, but it keeps you focused on you're more than just a body. So one of the reasons that we like to focus on heaven is because it helps remind us that we are more than just the physical, and that people who are suffering are more than just that. The second reason is because it helps us invest in our time and our resources in a wise way. If you don't have a heavenly perspective, when you go out to help people, you'll only help their physical needs. But if you have a heavenly perspective, a heavenly worldview, you will say, I want to do more. I want to help them see that the reason I'm doing this is eternity. I want them to have eternity. Our reason for helping people is, yes, part of it is our humanistic, and part of it, though, is our eternal, our heavenly. And thirdly, having a heaven-oriented worldview, it also helps us handle suffering and death in a healthy way. In other words, when you're suffering or when somebody else is suffering, a healthy way of handling it is to do everything possible to relieve their physical pain, but also to help them see that there's something beyond, that they have hope. That's what Peter was saying here when he said in that wonderful chapter 3, verse 13, we are looking forward to the new heavens and new earth he has promised, a world filled with God's righteousness. Let me put that into modern day English. If you look at the original language that Peter was writing in the Greek language, here's what he was saying. When he said, we are looking forward to the new heavens and the earth, here's what he was actually communicating. This will be the Nichols translation for you. He was saying, we are looking forward to what Jesus promised us. Jesus promised us a new heaven, a new earth, a new place that he's going to prepare for us. And whenever it says in the NIV translation, a world filled with God's righteousness, put that in everyday language, it was this. He was saying, Jesus said, I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. He said, it's going to be a perfect place where everything is right. Everything is the way God intended. Think about it for a minute. Jesus is saying, why do we focus on heaven? Because it gives us something to look forward to. When you are in the hospital, when you are in some situation you can't seem to get out of, that's very hard, Peter's saying, have this heavenly perspective, because it will help you deal with your suffering, knowing that there's something prepared for you. It's worth it all. This is not just the end. You are actually participating in the suffering of Christ, and you are going to be okay. There is a security of the believer. When you're born, you are born by Jesus, and you cannot be unborn. You may suffer a while, but you're going to be okay. That's what Peter was trying to translate. I think a thing that I'd like to kind of focus on here for just a minute before we hear some testimonies about this very subject. Peter was looking forward to eternity because, as you know, he was facing death himself, and all of the records about Peter outside of the Bible indicate that he was crucified for the Lord, only he wouldn't allow himself to be crucified right side up. He was crucified upside down because he said, I don't want to be as good as my Lord. But Peter knew he was going to die a horrible death. And just before he did, he wrote this letter. And Peter tried to help us see that we need to focus on eternity, because what it'll do, it'll help us see that it's all worth it now. It enables us to look, and here's a key phrase I'd like you to remember. It would enable us to look through and beyond our personal circumstances. That's something that we can help others do too. Help people and help ourselves look through and look beyond. You know, it's not that we're going to just look at heaven and ignore what's going on. It's that we have to see the more. We have to see the whole picture. That's what a worldview does. A worldview says, don't get caught up in just your immediate view, back off and see the whole view. And then Peter says this, for as you know him, that is Jesus, better, he will give you through his great power everything you need for living a truly good life. He even shares his own glory and his own goodness with us. He says we get everything we need. As we think about this, some of us, including myself, have faced death as a realistic factor. Any time now I could be gone. Some of you face that. Some of you, in fact, I got a feeling everybody that's on this Zoom class, every one of you have watched other people, close friends and family members who are facing death and maybe did die. And you know the difference in people who have this worldview that we call looking ahead, this worldview of a heavenly perspective. And it makes the difference that Peter was saying here. So I've asked a few people if they would share, and maybe you could be thinking about this, share their answer to this question. When either you or some family member or the both of you were going through some life-threatening situation, how was it that focusing on heaven, knowing about heaven, having assurance in heaven, how did that make a difference to you? And I've called on a few people and asked them just to give us a little word. One of them was Roger. I don't know if Roger has joined the Zoom class today or not. Roger, are you here? Maybe he told me that he may not be able to join because of the hospital schedule. So he sent me a little note, and I want to read to you what he said in case they got me doing something and I can't be on. You could tell this. He said, let me share this so you can read it to the class if I'm not able to be there. He said Carol was a teacher, a student, and those of you who don't know, Roger's wife, Carol, passed away. And it's been now, how long, Phyllis? About
close to 2 years.
Close to 2 years. And she had Lou Gehrig's disease, and he was by her side every minute to the end of her life. And here's what he said: Carol was a teacher's student. She always did her homework, always raised her hand. She was consciously immersed in women's Bible studies. She knew the word, and she didn't parse it to death like her other family member. As we lost our parents and other friends, she was as sure could be that they were in God's hands en route to heaven. But it's different when you're the one imminently facing the journey. She had to own it for herself. She would say with strong conviction, "My soul will be with God's hands in the heaven in a flash. No talk of judgment or sheep or goats. I've got my ticket and I'm glory bound." So though we both feared dealing with the inevitable loss of life to ALS, the big question was already resolved. What a great testimony. The second person I asked was Jeff Smith. Jeff lost his sister here a while back, and I asked Jeff if he would share either about that or about some other situation about how heaven is meaningful and important. Jeff, could you say a few words for us?
Sure, Bill. I think most of y'all, or many of y'all, met my sister. Can you hear me, Bill?
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, I think most of y'all met my sister, Cindy. She was closest in age to me and my family, and a great friend for a long time. Bill, you had many communications with her, I know, during her battle with cancer that were very meaningful to her. But then I was reflecting on the day where she passed away. There's such sadness, and it's such a dark time until we remember, the promise, that it's not the end, that it's just the end of the beginning, and the promise of, the new life and a more perfect life in front of you. It just seemed to change. It changed everything. It kind of pulls you up out of the muck from a personal standpoint and just puts a brightness into the future. And, it's kind of hard to understand at such a sad, solemn time how you can have optimism and even a smile on your face, because I could see her, greeting so many of the other loved ones, that we've lost in the past. And, keeping your eye looking forward at heaven just changes everything. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be stuck in that sadness and not have the, heaven to look forward to, and knowing that God's promise is there and he's always true to his promise. And so, it was just a real interesting time of such mixed emotions, but I was surprised that there was as much optimism that came with her death. And knowing that, she had gotten through it all. And I know how confident she was in the heaven that was in front of her. So 2 Peter really did kind of resonate with me in looking forward to heaven.
Thank you, Jeff. That's so helpful. One of the words that 2 Peter has that's so important. Peter used this word in the Greek. It's called politmos. Politmos is a word that we translate precious oftentimes in the New Testament. Do you know that in 2 Peter, that little tiny letter, he used the word precious 16 times? The word politmos, really for us, it means priceless. It means the most valuable, something that's so valuable you can't put a dollar figure on it. And Peter, this tough, rough fisherman, this strong guy, he spoke to these people knowing he was facing death and knowing they were going through hard times. And he talked about the precious, the priceless, the most valuable thing that's so valuable it's far above anything you can imagine. He used that word 16 times to describe the security believers have in facing eternity. Think about that, how precious it is. And as I listened to Jeff, it reminded me of just how priceless, how priceless the gift is that when you're facing hard times, that you have this security, you have this peace. Because I don't know, I guess one of the privileges we ministers have and chaplains have is being around so many people who face death and Christians who have this peace about them. They have this priceless gift of a sense of hope. And you just think, my goodness, living in this very, very difficult emotional time, they can be so joyful. I've seen it. But you know, the thing that really makes it even more clear is the darkness and the sadness and the depression and the fear that you get with people who don't know Jesus. So the humanistic approach that all there is just taking care of here and now ends up very sad and very sorrowful. But this hope that we have in Jesus brings a precious security. And I thank you, Jeff, for that word. And I really appreciate the fact that we can see in other people and understand, because of our worldview, we can understand why it makes all the difference in the world. Charlie, I asked Charlie Masters to share a little bit. He has recently faced death himself when he was given this terrible verdict that he had a form of cancer that takes most everybody. Charlie, how did heaven and the idea of heaven affect you during this time?
Oh, you muted me, I think.
No,
okay.
It's in
You know that as you and Jim and several in the class have experienced it personally, it's a telling moment. It was one where you appreciate that, you know, God uses the phrase, do not fear, 365 times in the Bible. And all of a sudden, when you get a diagnosis like stage 4 pancreatic, you go, you know what, I've got to make a choice. And my choice is that I'm going to ask to God to lead me through this, that, you know, the worst thing I can do is lose my faith in him and try and help myself and do it. And just said, God controls how many more chapters are in my book of life. But the one thing that won't change is that last paragraph will always say that, you know, Charlie's spirit resides at the right hand of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And having that comfort allows you to go through the chemotherapy, the days when the prognosis is not good. And it was just, it gives you a peaceful feeling in an unpleasant time. It's hard to articulate, but about the time, Bill, I got the diagnosis, I read in 1 Peter 1, 3-4, and I'm going to read this real quick. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant and boundless mercy has caused us to be born again to an everlasting hope and confident assurance through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead into an inheritance which is imperishable and undefiled and unfailing, reserved in the heaven for you. I have a spot reserved in heaven that can't be taken away. God has guaranteed it. And with that kind of assurance, you can only walk this journey with peace. At peace. Yeah, thank you, Joyce. So And again, you really feel the power of prayers. You understand that you're getting a payback now for a lot of the times that were very difficult, where you had to step out. So, and you understand people that don't have that blessing or don't appreciate it, how terrible it is for them to go through this time. So, and again, I want to thank everybody that's on today for all the many prayers that you sent my way and continue to send my way, because that's what cements the comfort.
Amen. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much. And I know I speak on behalf of all the class and how your worldview has made all the difference, and it has been an encouragement to us. In fact, that's one of the things that I really think that will help us. Hearing other people, being around other people, not staying alone, and letting the distractions of the world cause us to have a different worldview, a different way of looking at things. Because it leads me to the next question I want to ask the rest of the whole class, or maybe somebody else wants to share how you experienced some death experience, some terrible experience, and your view of worldview of heaven helps you. That's fine. You can share that in just a moment. But the other question I have related to that is what are, we know we get distracted. Good people, fine Christians get distracted. And I think that's Satan's way, because if he can't get us to stop believing, he can get us to focus on other things. How can we stay with this balanced view that Jesus had, that he was on his way to heaven? He was in a journey that was leading towards going home, but it did not cause him to stop focusing on people around him and trying to be helpful to God's children. So he had this balanced perspective that was heaven-bound, and while I'm here, I'm serving all those I can. As C.S. Lewis, I told you, said, the people who have the most heavenly perspective are the ones that do the most good here on earth. I think that's the balance. How do we maintain that balance? Anybody, what can you say? What are some things that will help us have that heavenly worldview and still do good and not get out of balance? What would you say? All of you got some things that help you keep that. Just give your name before you start talking so we'll know which one it is.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, it's Carol.
Oh, good.
I think what we heard played this morning on the piano, turn your eyes upon Jesus and look into his beautiful face. I think that says it all right there.
Amen. That's very good, Carol. And I might throw a plug in. I think if you don't have a Phyllis living in your house that sings these songs all the time and helps you think about heaven, you can always get yourself a recording and listen to good godly music. That's, Martin Luther, one of the ways he survived all the persecution of the Roman church is that he turned all these little scriptures into hymns and into choruses, because he said music is something you don't forget, where it's hard to remember all the scriptures. So music is a great help for keeping us focused on heaven. And I think Phyllis moved in here to say something.
Thank you. And thank you for your remark, Carol. And music is, it engages so much of us, our emotions and our minds. But what I wanted to say was, when I look across the many people who are on this Zoom class this morning, and the way they're fulfilling their purposes in their lives. I mean, we have a number of doctors, retired doctors, caregivers who have and still do face death every day in dealing with patients. And Bill and I pray for them every day, that they would find joy in what they do. The gift of life is such a gift. And it was important enough that God gave it to us. And these people that constantly give care to other people's bodies, we have a number of nurses on our Zoom class. And I'm just so grateful for those people who try to relieve the suffering and give quality of life to us as we live here on this earth. God gave us this life and we want to make the best of it, fulfilling our purpose. And then I'm so glad that Beverly Burke is on with us this morning. This woman who has given her life to taking care of people's spiritual needs, trying to broaden their worldview, as Bill's talked about this morning. And I look at David Blagg, who even in retirement is a hospice chaplain, dealing with people who are facing death every day. And what a beautiful message. I know David's heart, and I know what he's able to deliver to these suffering people. I just thank God that in his plan and in his mercy, he gave each one of us a purpose that we best be about while we're on this earth, whether it's feeding the hungry or taking care of a loved one or going to the hospital every day to take care of patients or writing a card or praying for somebody, that powerful ministry of prayer. But we all, as long as we're here and we're walking around and living and breathing, we got something to do. And thank goodness we can look forward to, as Bill has talked about this morning, being free of these bodies and free to be with Jesus for eternity. But till then, we best be busy.
All right. Thank you, Phyllis. Somebody, what are some things we can do to keep the balance of being heavenly minded and also humanly minded? This is your chance to share something.
I can speak up, Bill.
Okay, who do we have?
This is Ruth.
Okay.
So first of all, thanks to everybody who prayed for my hand last week. I want to share something that wasn't life and death, thankfully, but it was extremely painful and instructive. So Friday night, a week ago, I was minding my own business and being a good human being, decided to take my little dog out for one more walk because she needed to relieve herself. And I walked out the front door and was kind of juggling two dogs at once with leashes, and all of a sudden something zapped my finger. And I thought it was the dog leash, and I shook it off and said, well, it'll go away. Went around, did my walk, and about a 20-minute walk in the dark. And as I was walking, it just got more intensely painful until I got back to the house. And this was like very strange. And I told my husband, there's something very bad has happened to my finger. And long story short, we think it was perhaps a black widow spider or a scorpion or something that bit me out of the blue. And I never was able to see it. We looked subsequently the next day, what was it that bit me? Can't find a thing, but I will tell you that for the next 2 days, I really couldn't go anywhere. And I had intense pain. And I first started thinking, well, why me? I was minding my own business. What did I do to deserve this? And it even made me think, if anybody read the Harry Potter series, you know, there's that Horcrux spell that the wizards use where you zap somebody and they suffer like really intense pain, but in addition, they're paralyzed and they can't move or do anything. And that's kind of how that was my view of it, Bill. That was my worldview. It was a Horcrux. Because I could not do anything. And my whole family was, you know, revolving around me, and not their whole lives were revolving around this. But eventually I was relieved of this pain. And when it was gone, it was just incredible. And it was like all at once, just it's over, it's gone, without any pain medication whatsoever. And so I've just been puzzling about it. Why did that happen? I learned so many things, actually. Well, first of all, I benefited tremendously from love and caring from people like Phyllis, who sent food, through Jan Patterson, who came and gave me her time and brought me herbs and flowers and essential oils and companionship. with time to reflect. And Dr. Nurani Kester, who's an emergency medicine doctor who's become affiliated with our center through his work at the refugee clinic, came and paid me a visit, met my whole family. So those are treasures. But I also learned something about pain management, and that when you take pain medication, you can actually be relieved of your pain, but you go into a twilight zone where you don't like really have any sense of the passage of time. I have no idea what all happened that weekend, other than that I was lying on the couch with ice packs on my hand. I guess ultimately I've thought, well, maybe I didn't go places that I shouldn't have gone or that would have been more dangerous for me because I was stuck at home. But on the other hand, I did stay put and was able to appreciate other people and what their healing energy, and to be conscious of that and the recipient of it, and to recognize that ultimately we have the capacity to transform, and we can take negative energy or power or even evil that comes at us, and we don't have to be undone by it, but that going through it can lead us to a brighter place and show us things about ourselves and what we can be for other people. So
thank you. That's
what I have to share.
Thank you so much, Ruth. What a wonderful testimony. Anybody else want to share? I know I've heard, personally, I've heard Ruth's mother, Gretchen, talk about when she was serving, especially in the Congo in Africa, and seeing so many very, very difficult demonic forces fighting against good. Gretchen, I don't know, my screen doesn't show everybody, but I assume you're still there. How did you keep a heavenly perspective when you had so much emergency pain and suffering? Because I think it's like Ruth said, you know, you react to these things because we are human. We see it around us. How do you balance those two things? How did you balance those two things? Can we see? Okay, she may not be there. Okay, we got time for somebody else. Anybody else want to say, how do we keep that sense of that we're more than just our bodies, and yet at the same time care and help people stop the bleeding and stop the pain the best we can? How do we keep that balance? Anybody else want to share?
Well, this is Gretchen. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that was very meaningful to me in Africa was the presence of other Christians, and especially the women that I came to know and love. We lost a full-term stillborn son in Africa, and to my surprise, the women in the church just took turns always being by my side, and they didn't try to talk or tell me anything. They were just there. And sometimes they'd hold my hand or pat my hand. But I learned that the presence of other Christians is very, very precious. And I learned that you don't have to talk. You don't have to say something. I think when we minister to each other, we often search for words. The African women seem to know and teach me that presence is very important. And that helped me get through that and many other crises. So don't be afraid to just walk up and be present to someone. And you don't have to have words. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. You know, I do think that's one of the reasons that so many people find it hard to think and talk about heaven and eternity, is because of the mystery of it. There's so much most of it that we don't know, don't understand. So rather than look foolish, we just don't do anything. But I think Gretchen's message is important because, you know, there is a mystery about Jesus saying that the Bible saying that the Spirit of the Lord is in you, meaning at least we understand this part. Somehow when we do something for others, somehow God works through us. In other words, if you have a worldview that there is God, you have a worldview that there's more than just flesh and this present time, then certainly you have the idea that when you have the Spirit of God, that when you sit with someone, when you touch someone, that in some mysterious way, maybe God is actually doing the work through you. If you see yourself, how you see yourself as somebody being used in cooperation with, in partnership with God and His Spirit. You know, we talk about energy, we talk about the force of God, we talk all those kind of things. There are all these attempts we have to explain the spiritual world, but I think we do have in common this idea that there is more than just the flesh and blood, and that somehow that when we do and we are present, we touch and we care, that people experience that sense of God's presence.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
This is Vicki.
Okay, Vicki.
Could I have a second?
Yeah.
I'd like to, are we out of time? We are out of time.
Well, take a little minute though.
Okay. Well, when I listened to Gretchen talking about Africa, I just wanted to mention that I guess it was 11 years ago when I first felt like I was getting called to go over to Uganda. And all the way over there, I was saying, why am I going? Why am I going? You know, I don't know why God's sending me there, but I had to go. And since that time, I mean, all of the things that He put together, it wasn't me. I showed up, but what a blessing I got from all the things that I've been able to do over there, and how the people just express themselves and love one another. And for me to be able to be part of that, it's been such a blessing to my life. And sometimes when things aren't going well for me here and I get over there, it all comes home to me that there's more to life than just me. There's this whole other world out there.
Yes.
And so when my problems seem overwhelming, I go there and I see people that are in very dire circumstances and death around them constantly, illness around them constantly. They're a community and they love one another and they care for one another and they care for us when we're there with nothing. It's just amazing. And so for me, that me being able, I felt like for me to be a nurse, it was all about that, God bringing me to that point in my life where I could go there and do that for the children that I'm able to care for when I'm there. So,
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I took a couple minutes.
Oh, no, that was perfect. Perfect way to close an important lesson from Peter, and a message for us today. And thank you for all of you who shared, because I think it helps us do that. We need to hear these stories, these true stories, these life-changing experiences, these worldviews that help us rethink our day and our lives. And I want to thank all of you. Look forward to seeing you next time as we move to the letters of John, the eldest apostle. And have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.